So to create this selection with varied hardness that is sharper at the front end of the star and softer at the far end of the star, I'll start off by creating a very rough selection with a lasso tool. So I'll just select the lasso tool and create a very sloppy selection here around the star. This is only to create some sort of starting point, so I have something to work with. To touch up this selection now, I'll actually edit it in something called the Quickmask mode. And quite far down at the bottom of the toolbox, you'll actually find a symbol there called Editing Quickmask Mode. If you just point at a button in the toolbox and let the mouse cursor rest over it, you'll actually get information about that particular button. I'll just click on the Quickmask, Editing Quickmask mode here. And when I do that, my selection will actually be converted into a grayscale image, where all these red parts are actually black, and the transparent parts here, or where you see the color image, that's actually white. The benefits with editing selections as grayscale images is the visual feedback and the fact that I can actually use the brush tool to edit this selection. If I select the brush tool and right click somewhere in the image, I can edit the actual brush here, or the basic settings of the brush. I can use one of the preset brushes, or I can use one of the standard brushes. And I can change the diameter of the brush, and I have the ability to actually vary the hardness of the brush as well. So if I'll start with editing the selection at the sharp end of the star here, I need a brush that's fairly hard. I don't need a razor sharp brush, and that's not even possible. The brush is always slightly soft at the edges. But I need a fairly hard brush anyway. I'll set the diameter to fit my needs at the moment as well. To hide the panel for the brush settings here, I'll simply press the Enter key on the keyboard and the panel will disappear. The brush always uses the color that's defined as the foreground color. And if we look right above the Quickmask button, we have two color swatches, one black and one white. The color swatch in front here is the foreground color, and the color swatch in the back there is the background color. And by default, you have black as the foreground color and white as the background color. If you want to make absolutely sure that you have black as the foreground color and pure white as the background color, you can actually click this little icon above the foreground and background color, which is resetting the default colors. If you click that, you have absolute black and absolute white as your foreground and background color. Right beside the default colors, you have this arrow symbol. If you click that, you can actually switch between foreground and background color. That's very useful when using the brush tool. And if you point at that symbol, you get this additional information. And at the far right there, you have the keyboard shortcut for switching foreground and background colors. That's actually a fairly useful keyboard shortcut to remember, since we're going to need to switch between black and white here, especially when we're editing this selection in Quickmask mode. And the keyboard shortcut for switching between foreground and background color is the key X on the keyboard. So that's very useful to remember now that we're gonna have to switch between black and white. If you try to create a selection here with a brush tool and just start painting that selection, you'll quickly find out that it isn't all that easy to create a perfectly smooth selection here. But the benefit here is still that you can vary the hardness of the brush which will allow you to actually create a selection that has both hard and soft edges. If you press down with the right mouse button somewhere in the image, you can actually go in and adjust the hardness of the brush. If we bring down the hardness to 0%, you'll actually have the softest brush that Photoshop can produce. And you can see that the edges become really soft. The hardness of the brush is, however, relative, meaning that the hardness is actually set in a percentage of the size of the brush. And if I have a really soft brush but a small diameter, I will actually get a brush that looks fairly sharp. If I compare that to a soft brush with a large diameter, you can see that the edges become much softer. Because the hardness is relative to the size of the brush, the larger the brush is, the more flexible it is. You can vary the hardness of the brush much more. So you should always use the largest brush that is useful in your case. So I'll start by defining a fairly large brush here to get the variation I need. And I'm starting with a sharper part of the star here, so I'll need a fairly hard brush as well. And I'll start by switching the foreground and background color, so I have white as my foreground color. That way I can clean up the mask here that I've messed up here. And I'll open up the mask so I have a really open mask to begin with. I just find that it's easier to create this selection from the outside, so I'll open up the mask quite a lot. And I'll switch back to black as my foreground color so I can start closing this mask. To achieve a smooth selection edge here, I'll actually use a small trick here. I'm going to shift click around the star here to create a really smooth edge. If you click once with the brush tool and hold down the shift key and click again, those two click points will actually be connected by a straight line. This is very useful if you're trying to achieve smooth lines with a brush tool. I'll actually decrease the size of the brush here so it's slightly smaller. And I'll shift click my way around the star here now. And I'll just start by clicking once and pressing down the shift key and tracing the edge with the edge of the brush here. So it's aligned with the line I'm trying to select. And I'll hold down the shift key and click again to create a straight line here. And I purposely go too far here because I want to get to the corner here as well. So I'll just mask off more than I need, and I'll open up the mask afterwards here. And to do that, I'll switch to white as my foreground color and just open up the mask. And I just continue shift clicking here to close the mask again. Now I need to start adjusting the hardness of the brush. So I need to decrease the hardness to match the edge of the star here, which is slightly softer or more unsharp. Again, I go too far and open up the mask. I'll decrease the soft hardness even more, so I get an even softer brush here. And I'll open up the mask again here. Continue closing the mask by shift clicking around here. And I just open up the mask if I feel I need more space to create a better selection here. So I'm constantly actually switching between black and white as the foreground color here by pressing the X key. And whenever I arrive at a harder edge or a faster transition here, I just adjust the hardness of the brush and to match that edge. So I'm increasing the hardness here because the star is becoming sharper and sharper here. It's coming closer to the camera. At this point, it's still really difficult to tell how good this selection will actually be. You usually don't see how good the selection is until you actually use it for something. The mask edges here is helpful to make a rough judgment of the selection, but the real truth actually comes out when you actually use it for something, which we'll do in a second here. So this looks to be a decent selection, at least. To get back to the standard mode where I actually have the selection as a selection, I need to switch back to the standard mode, which I do by clicking the Quickmask button in the toolbox again. Whenever I click that, I get back into the standard mode. And now I can actually use my selection for something. And I'll actually use the selection to change the color of the star. That way we'll see how well this selection actually works. And to do that, I'll actually add something called an adjustment layer. And that's something you'll find under the layer menu. If you go down there to the third section, you have new adjustment layer as a submenu there. And we'll use an adjustment layer called hue and saturation. You have a lot of different image adjustment settings here, and hue and saturation is one of those. And it's a quick and easy way to actually change the color of a portion of an image. I'll just accept the default settings here. I won't name this new layer in any way. And looking at the layer panel here, you can see we actually got a new layer above the background layer. And you have a symbol here for the adjustment that's currently active here. And the selection was actually converted into a layer mask. So we don't actually see the selection anymore in the image. But we still have the selection available as a layer mask here. And the white parts of this layer mask are the open parts. That's where you'll actually see the effect of the adjustment. While the black parts are protected parts. You won't see any effect in the black parts of the mask here. If I start by changing the adjustment for hue here, we can quickly see that something is happening in the image. If I drag it slightly to the left, I get a red star instead. If I drag it to the right, I get a yellow, to a green, and eventually blue star here. But I want to create a red star, which will make everything much clearer. We'll see much clearer how good our selection actually is. I'll even increase the saturation of the star here, so we get an even redder star. Now we can actually judge our selection here as well. And here we can see there's some green color fringing at the unsharp edge of the star here. So my selection wasn't all that good here. But nothing is actually set in stone. So I have every possibility here to adjust the selection that I made. And the selection is actually already converted into a grayscale image. So I actually adjust this mask the same way as I adjust the Quickmask. And the mask of this layer is actually the only part where I can actually paint and use hand tools to make changes. And since this is a grayscale image, I adjust it exactly the same way as I adjust the Quickmask mode. So I use the brush tool to actually paint over the parts that wasn't masked correctly. So I'll just use black paint here, and I can use an even softer brush here to create this transition here between the masked and the open parts here. And I'll just paint with black to cover those color fringed areas here. At the top right edge here, I need a slightly harder brush to adjust the selection here, or the mask. And I can shift click here to create a really smooth edge as well. At the sharper end here, I need a much harder brush, because that's a much faster transition as well. So again, I'll just shift click with a harder brush here to adjust the mask.